Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. It's lovely to be back at an R conference, if only digitally. A little bit about me before we talk about practical data science and AI ethics. I'm CEO at Nightingale HQ. I help people adopt data science and AI inside their companies, particularly manufacturers. So a lot of what I do is also business related in helping businesses understand the impact of data science and AI, both the good and the bad. So getting things right from the start really matters to me, because if we do it wrong, it can have huge societal implications. I'm a Microsoft Most Valued Professional in the data platform and AI spaces. That's because I really love the Microsoft technical communities and have been active in helping people be better with data and data science now for more than a decade. Please follow up with me afterwards. I'm available on Twitter, LinkedIn, and via email. I'm very happy to go into more detail on any of these topics. So the first step in being effective at building an ethical AI data science capability is getting alignment inside your organization. So you might be the data scientist or the AI specialist, or the scientist. Your work sits in a broader context, and it's important for everybody in that broader context to be focused on the same things. If the stakeholders to your work don't care about the ethical implications of it, and you try to add more time to the project to ensure ethical outcomes, that's not going to work very well for you professionally. So what we need to do, first of all, is make sure we know what we're scoped to do, what we have sign off to do, and how we can make sure that we have the right set of outcomes for both the company or the organization we're working for, the people impacted by our solutions, and by us as we deliver this work. So one of the first things that you can think about is this distinction between responsible solutions and ethical solutions. So I would argue that all solutions we build, we should try to build responsibly. And when we build responsible solutions, we're minimizing the risk of unintended negative consequences. So this is making sure that we don't breach people's data we don't use it inappropriately. We make sure that it's able to be used by a wide range of people, that it's robust. So we do a lot of things to make sure that we don't accidentally do something wrong. Ethical AI and data science is a stronger stance than that. It's not just about minimizing an intended risk, but about making sure that we actually minimize the potential for harm generally. So if you think about something that could be considered innocuous, like a recommendation engine. If we put a recommendation engine inside a shopping solution, it can help people find the right product for what they need. But if somebody has a spending addiction, that might encourage them to spend more and more. So if we combined that recommendation engine with like an active discounting strategy intended to entice people to buy, then it's great for profits, but not so great for the individual person. As a result, when we're talking about ethical AI, and part of why we need that alignment is because we need to know where the boundaries are in what we all consider inside the group of people developing and deploying and using the AI solution to what is considered our ethical responsibilities. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on things like human subject research and stuff, but you can check out past talks from other R conferences. I talked about this in more detail in the YR conference, but it's also something that is a much, much broader discussion. So part of getting the alignment is making sure that everybody understands you should be building responsible AI solutions for a variety of reasons, but also detailing what is considered your ethical responsibility and what you will care about as an organization when putting things like data science and AI into practice.
Steph, excuse me just for a second. Can you switch to full screen for your PowerPoint, please? Because we can see the whole presentation mode.
So you don't need the subtitles?
Oh, you don't have a subtitle if you get in full screen? Because we see both. I think they have issue seeing that in pairs.
Better?
Yeah, but we can see the presentation mode, so we can see the slide numbers and everything. So.
Ah, okay. Sorry, the screen share said it was sharing the PowerPoint screen, even if it was showing the presenter view.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
But it's nice to see you in full screen both. So.
Okay.
Okay.
No
Perfect.
presenter view. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the implications and nuances of things like that recommendation system combined with a discount predictive solution, the combination of that might result in an unethical solution. But that could actually be really difficult for people to understand with their level of knowledge about data science and its use inside business. So it can be really hard to get that alignment without first educating people about what data science and AI can do and its impacts. So it's important that you start communicating about ethics internally. So discussing it with people inside your kind of chain of command, with people who might be wanting to use data science and AI so that they start thinking about these things. There's also some great books like Weapons of Mass Destruction that you can be distributing or recommending people read to help them understand the impact that data and AI can have. There's also a number of workshops that you can run to help people understand and start understanding what the implications are and what mitigants people might need to put in place to help avoid unethical outcomes. So education, both getting up the basic data science and AI literacy and the ethical implications is really important to securing that alignment. One of the toughest discussions that you will probably have is about this concept of fairness. When we build models, most of us say we want it to be fair, but actually we can mean different things when we say a model is fair with respect to people. So some people might think of it as the group unaware, like everybody gets assessed on the same framework. The problem with that is that the data that we've had in the past usually has a lot of process and systemic bias associated with it. So if you work in a financial organization and want to score something like credit worthiness, your bank might have been running for hundreds of years. And it's going to have a lot of kind of, I'm going to be honest, sexism, racism, and all sorts of things inside that data that meant that business processes meant that women were less likely to get loans, or that other underrepresented groups were considered differently. So you put in all that data and you distill it, and you basically distill that bias. So the same cutoff points across all the groups might be great for certain segments of the population, but might be really poor for other groups. So it might not be appropriate for when you're thinking about what's considered fair, because you might want to make it easier for women or other groups to start accessing your product to be considered more proactively. So then things like group thresholds might come into play, setting slightly different bars for different groups so that you can start getting to start changing the mix of customers. Similarly, you might try to aim for demographic parity. If you're working in a marketing organization and you want your and you need to do things like optimize to discuss the differences is a big part of that kind of ethics literacy that will be helpful for building a mature data science and AI function. So once you've kind of gotten some of that alignment, people are keen to support ethical outcomes of your work. They understand the differences. You also need to start making them think before you start coding. So you're not always going to be the subject domain expert. People inside the business who want the data science or AI product that you can build for them are much closer to understanding their customers, their rules, their ways of doing things. So what we should be doing is encouraging them to think about things before it even gets to you, to start considering the ethical implications. And I said this should be practical. So like having workshops, books to share, things like setting out the definitions of fairness and being able to describe them, we can take it into this making others think before you start section. So it's really useful to have checklists. Checklists make life a lot easier. There is a great book called The Checklist Manifesto that shows just the act of having a checklist can greatly increase quality of work and processes. So one such checklist that you can help people use as part of the planning and idea stage of building data science and AI products, as well as throughout, is Microsoft's responsible AI checklist. So there's plenty of these kind of things around, but I like Microsoft's one for just having 6 points. So you can start off at this basic level of just having 6 things that you ask people to think about before they get you to do the work. Basically, these could be 6 fields on your GitHub issue that people fill in to make sure that they've considered things. So what is the definition of fairness that you're going to use? What is needed to make sure that you're going to arrive at the same outcomes for people? How is this solution going to be inclusive? How are you going to support access from a wide variety of people? If you build, for instance, a natural language processing solution, does it need to be multilingual? Do you need to have speech to text first to support people who aren't going to be able to type easily? So what do you need to make it inclusive? And that will vary based on use case. And that's why it's great to have your business stakeholders start thinking about these things. What situations is this solution going to be used in? What's needed to make it reliable? For instance, if you were building an anomaly detection solution that would sit for monitoring machines and making sure that they don't exceed significant bounds, then those machines might work in an area where there's Wi-Fi, but they probably won't. So it needs to be able to work offline, securely, reliably, without oversight and excessive and lots of monitoring. So that's a consideration the person requesting the solution might know, but you won't. What are the kind of security and privacy implications that need to be taken into account? Is this highly sensitive customer data? Is it commercially sensitive? Is there legal implications to using it? Is it going to be kind of what's called the secret source of the business? Is it going to be a highly commercially valuable algorithm that absolutely cannot be retro-engineered? How are they going to communicate to the users, to the people impacted, that this solution is in place? That might be part of your GDPR requirements around letting people know how their data will be used in automated decision-making. And accountability. Who's going to be the business owner for this? Who's going to make sure that you actually hit the 5 other points? So going through these things at the beginning of the thinking process and design stage of your solutions can just help you build a more robust solution. And remember, responsible AI is ensuring no unintended negative consequences. You might add additional items to your checklist to make sure it's ethical in the eyes of your company. So you might add different additional criteria during your planning stage. You'll want to add something like an impact assessment. And again, this impact assessment will vary based on your organization and needs, but you should be thinking about who's going to use the solution. What is the kind of what's called the happy path? What happens when things go right? But no solution is perfect. So what happens when something goes wrong? What are we going to do to make sure that, if something goes wrong, what's the harm our solution can do? And part of that is, how are you going to handle things like your false negatives versus your false positives? In a medical setting, saying, getting a false negative so somebody doesn't get treatment could be a lot more harmful than saying than a false positive, and meaning they have to have further tests. And they're going to be groups that could be impacted as a secondary order. So if we offer loans and we get and we offer loans to young people, and we get the credit risk model wrong, will parents or people who are around those young people be impacted? What KPIs inside the organization might our solution impact? So this is both ethical and a standard thing. So I've seen in a lot of organizations, they might introduce a solution to, for instance, better pre-qualify sales leads. But as a result, that greatly reduces the volume of sales leads that got generated, and salespeople suddenly had a big reduction in how much they took home, how much bonuses they got, because it impacted a KPI inside the business. So we need to think about what KPIs will be impacted. And we need to think about the behaviors we're trying to drive. Do we want to risk a lot of overspending from our customers, or do we want to see just a broader uptake of products? What are we trying to achieve? Is it higher profitability, product spread? What do we want to achieve? So when we think about these types of things in our impact assessment, before we even start, we're thinking about the real world implications to make sure that we avoid the risk of unintended negative consequences, and we start putting into place controls to make sure that we're meeting our ethical requirements as an organization. There are a number of useful frameworks that are starting to be available to help us kind of plan things like procurement. So the AI acquisition report from AI Now Institute details the way that you can start thinking about public tendering for AI solutions, and you can use this internally. And the data ethics framework from the UK government outlines how they will use data and analyze it and process it. So you can start looking at some of these types of frameworks and lifting it into your organization to help people plan, deliver, and implement ethical AI solutions. You also need to be thinking about the compliance aspects of the work and trying to get a lot of this built in to the beginning stages. So what are your legal requirements? Things like GDPR. There's an AI Act that is under consultation across the EU that will put different requirements on different types of AI solutions. What are your contractual requirements? What do you have in place with the people impacted by the solution whose data you'll be using? What privacy considerations do you have? People have different privacy expectations around the use of data in different types of scenarios. You also have to make sure things like your privacy policy and stuff like that but also will represent the usage of the data. Solutions might be governed by regulators as well. So what will the regulators think about this? Getting early consideration of regulatory sign-off and requirements can decide whether a solution should be built or shouldn't. And finally, you might want to consider building in a consultation process. So soliciting user feedback before you begin about the benefits of what you're building. This will fit very well into kind of a product management function and any user experience and research type of capability. All of these things can start fitting inside your existing workflow and tools. So you should have a planning and collaboration platform. That could be something like Teams or Slack or GitHub or Azure DevOps or somewhere that you all communicate and track work on. Having a single place to do all the communication and collaboration on data science and AI ideas is really useful. But we can also take it a step further. So you can build your own tools. I found this one from Microsoft. It's really neat, easy to get up and running, very customizable. But you can help people take that planning stage about thinking about errors, thinking about the impact, thinking about responsible AI, and guiding them through the process. So this is basically an interactive checklist capability, and that helps people arrive at solid conclusions. You can build your own, you can have it, integrate it, you can add extra fields to your systems, whatever. But the people considerations, the processes that you want to implement should be supported by your tooling. So people have thought about it, they've done their thinking, and now it's up to you to do the work. So to ensure that as you do the data science and AI development, you should start implementing workflow practices and automation to help make sure that you arrive at the right outcome. So this is about the processes and tools that you use to make sure that you're working to arrive at that ethical solution. A great way to help minimize data privacy issues, to correct data for to generate further data for groups that might be underrepresented, and a number of other use cases, is to start utilizing synthetic data. There's a great package, SynthPop, that can help you do this. And you might also start looking at things like differential data privacy, where data only gets looked at once, and various other things. But you can do training data creation that helps you avoid data privacy risks and can help you mitigate some of the gaps in the data that prevent you from arriving at a fair outcome. During your exploratory data analysis, you can be testing for different levels of bias in your data. So during an R OpenSci Unconf, people started looking at exploratory data analysis notebooks towards this. And this is the sort of thing that you can be putting into place. Given that you know your data, you can, and any protected characteristics or any high risk groups, things like that, you could be building common ways to analyze things that you're going to be predicting based on these characteristics. ML ops, machine learning operations, is about building a robust pipeline and process of work to help you get high quality data science and AI solutions into production. So throughout this, there's a lot of automation. And you might see some of this through the development process in things like Drake. You might start putting it live through things like Plumber. You might use GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, Travis CI. You might have a number of these different bits and pieces of tools in place. But inside your broader process, where you start going from creation to production, you can be putting checks and analysis all the way along to help make sure that you are analyzing, building explainability details, testing for fairness based on specifications, checking your high risk or underrepresented groups, monitoring for things once it's live. So inside your machine learning operations, as you start automating and building a robust workflow, you can be integrating your ethical and responsible AI kind of checklists and tests into this process so that every time you make an amendment, it's checked for your desired outcomes. In terms of testing for fairness, you usually need functions for the different types of fairness. So the 5 typical ones that we started out with earlier. You should perform analysis by groups. So very much like your exploratory data analysis. And another thing that you can do is start having pen portraits.
Okay, first, second benches.
You can have kind of sample records, not real records, because that's usually an abuse of somebody's personal data based on their contracts. But you can have, this is a Jane, this is a Mael, this is, we have these different people, these different, who represent different groups. Let's see what our data, our model would have an outcome for them. Because you might have 2 people with similar education backgrounds, various other bits and pieces, but they might differ on, say, current salary. What's the impact, the outcome for the 2 different pen portraits when it just differs by salary? It has a dashboard, interactive dashboard capability where you can build a dashboard to be able to assess relative fairness across different groups. So you can be testing assumptions. Fairness is currently where a lot of the work, a lot of the research is going, but depending on your situation, you might want to build your own bespoke packages to test specific implications, or of course, check the literature, read up, do research, find other ways of testing your models for what matters to your business. The final step is maintaining vigilance. It's, if you've gone through and you've planned and try to arrive at the right outcome, once you put it into production, you actually need to make sure that you're still doing that it's still having the outcomes that you expected. It's being, it's making the right impacts, not the wrong impacts, that people understand how it's used, that compliance is maintained. And as you go through the process, the first time that you add all of these things in is going to be the most expensive in terms of time, difficulties, and production capability. Every model after that becomes a little bit easier because people are used to the workflow, but you should be reflecting the learnings back in. So you might find that you use the exploratory data analysis and you wrote that from scratch, but when you started putting it into production, the model into production, you found that you'd forgotten a group, or there was a consideration you hadn't thought about. You take that knowledge, that learning, and then reinforce that into your next version of your exploratory data analysis notebook so that you don't miss that in future. When you put models into production, you should be monitoring them. So what data resulted in what scores? You should be logging it. And that means that then you can monitor protected characteristics, high-risk groups, underrepresented minorities, different things like that, to be able to make sure that your measure of fairness that you can is actually happening in practice. You can check, you should be looking at things like spot checks and counterfactuals. So counterfactuals are where two records are pretty similar, but ended up with different outcomes. So once something's in production, why are people getting different answers? And you also need to monitor for the concept of data drift. Fundamentally, our machine learning models, particularly if they're not reinforcement learning models, assume that the past, that the future reflects what happened in the past. As we get if we're not regularly retraining that model and not using it and not reincorporating things, then the past that we use, the subset of training data, gets older and older. Patterns of behavior change, processes change, so we get drift in our data, and this can end up with inappropriate outcomes for, inside our model. So we need to be checking for things like data drift as well. We need to think about security. So how can people gain the solution? How, if they can kind of reverse engineer how our fraud detection model works, then they can start avoiding sorting out their fraud so that it doesn't raise flags. You need to make sure that your supply chain, your dependencies of your solution are also secure, because if somebody breaches a package or a platform that you're reliant on, people can then impact your solution and change the outcomes for people. So security is a really big area, and I think generally we all need to be paying a bit more attention to how our models are secured. And we need to continue engagement. So I mentioned things like consultation processes at the beginning. We should be doing that once it's in production, making sure it's being used effectively. Look at things like customer services records for problems that your solution might have caused. Make sure that AI and any solution you build is appropriately mapped into your internal compliance capabilities, and continue improving literacy and understanding around data science and AI inside your organization, because if nothing else, you're going to get new people joining your group of stakeholders. Other people are going to leave and be replaced. And these people need to maintain that understanding of the value of what you can do and the risks involved, so that everything stays up to date and you continue to maintain that level of buy-in and alignment from the organization. So thank you all very much. In terms of practical ethics, I've not gone into what you should care about, because that is very dependent, but how you care about it is pretty consistent. So make sure you get that alignment on what should be cared about, what is your ethical scope as an AI or data science function. Build up the planning and product development process so that other people who are much closer to the customers and the actual impact think about things like transparency, governance, impact. Build your workflow to bake in as much data, as much checks as possible, so that you can make sure that you're consistently checking for ethical outcomes. And then maintain vigilance. Make sure you have the ongoing processes for production, compliance, and continued education to be able to continue getting good outcomes in practice. So thank you all very much. It's been lovely to speak to you all today, and hopefully I haven't overrun and we have some time for questions.
Yes, sure. We have 5 minutes for questions. So thank you very much, Steph. So you can either ask question in the Slack or on the channel, or if you want to ask a question in Zoom, please raise your hand so we can unmute you and just give you, some time to ask a question. So does anybody have a question? Okay, so Julien, is there a question here?
No, I don't see any hand, sorry.
Okay, so I'll start. So this is more going to be a question about, like the event organizer perspective. So do you think we should invite more, I don't know, philosophers, sociologists to our conferences just to talk about this topic? Because it seems that, our events are more about technical stuff, but should we invite more people from outside the technical world just to speak about this? What do you think?
Definitely. I've got a philosophy degree, so I'm biased. But social scientists, philosophers, there's people who specialize in the ethics of technology. We should be having a broader discussion about how these things impact people, because almost all of us really end up building solutions that impact people. And that makes it critical that we're being good to each other.
Okay, great. So I'll take a note for the next conference. And yeah, and if, let's say I have a product and I want to start working and thinking about this, like what would be the first step I should take tomorrow? Just what would be the first practical thing I should do tomorrow?
I would probably say get the responsible AI checklist. It's 6 considerations. It's also got a really nice website that you can send to people inside your business. It has a bunch of like short videos and stuff like that. So it's a really easy way to start getting people more aware about some of the considerations around building solutions that have good outcomes. It's free, and checklists make everything better.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, this is going to be my last question. So, do you think? So we, I think. Do you think we can only use tools? Can we rely only on tools, or is there are other tools reliable? Because I know, for example, for accessibility tools, like in building Google Chrome, it's not enough. Like people with disability are going to say it's not enough. So, do you think we can rely on tools only, or is there like something more to do?
No, we can't rely on tools to do everything for us. So we first of all need to think about people, and that might be things like the engagement of accessibility specialists and other people inside our consultation process and thinking and planning. We need the processes in place to make sure that we consider these things. Tools are just the way that we speed up and reinforce these things. Tools rarely fully automate any task, but they help us cover the fundamentals. There might not be there might be tools available right now, like different packages and stuff that can help you, but they usually won't have full coverage. So you might end up building tools that matter to you and your organization, open source them for the win. But they're never going to give you can't just build a tool and say, I have an ethical AI solution as a result.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a question in the chat. Could you share with us an example of a case or reported case where rethinking and reassess the AI and machine learning machinery radically changed the customer experience? Do you have like?
Yeah, so one solution that I was building for an organization was for additional mortgages that people could take out. And when we built the first solution, we included some calculations and variables that were very predictive, but it turned out that they were highly dependent on the discussions around fitness for the loan and various other things that the staff member engaging with the loan applicant would be doing. So it was a very volatile figure that could change throughout the process, and was also changed based on kind of know your customer and fin and kind of different discussions. So because it was part of a process of ensuring the solution was ultimately responsible for the customer, we chose to remove that field from our model. We made it overall a little less predictive, but because we were then able to wrap it more broadly and more stably inside that know your customer and customer fitness process, it ended up with a better outcome for customers.
Okay, great. So I think we're going to stop here. So if anybody has another question, I suppose we can reach to you on Twitter or via mail.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you again, Steph, and I hope we'll have a chance to meet in person next year, maybe.
Indeed. Thank you all. It was great speaking to you today.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.